like and subscribe, and leave a comment below. Beyond Antarctica. Chapter 33. Todd squinted as he peered through the cavern entrance, with his eyes scanning the sea of towering giants outside, as their rhythmic chanting echoed through the cave, making the ground vibrate beneath his feet. "Hey, Tony," Todd whispered urgently, nudging his friend with his elbow. "Look over there. You see what I see?" Tony followed Todd's gaze, with his jaw tightening as he spotted the familiar figure in the crowd. "No way. That's the same giant we ran into last time, the one that helped us." Todd nodded, with a crazy idea forming in his mind. "If we take some of these broken crystal fragments scattered around and string them together, maybe we can make a trinket, an offering." John, standing nearby, raised an eyebrow. "I thought these giants were bred to be docile. You're telling me they could turn violent?" Todd shook his head, quickly scooping up the glittering fragments from the cavern floor. "They are docile, but we're messing with their belief system, John. Their faith. You mess with anyone's faith, and they'll go from peaceful to aggressive real quick." Tony cracked a smile. "It's like when Kim tells you no special creamer for your coffee. You're normally a peaceful-go-lucky kind of guy, but that changes real quick, don't it?" Snickering as he made the claim, John chuckled, despite being the butt of the joke. "Fair point." Todd and Tony quickly fashioned the makeshift trinket out of the crystal shards. The fragments shimmered in the dim light as they strung them together with some rope Tony had grabbed from his pack. It wasn't much, but it looked like the kind of offering depicted in the ruins. "Well," Todd said, holding the crude trinket up for inspection, "let's hope this works. Otherwise, we're about to be stomped into paste." With the makeshift crystal trinket in hand, the crew moved cautiously toward the cavern entrance. The closer they got, the louder the chanting became. The giants, standing in their vast rows, bowed rhythmically toward the cave, with their low voices rumbling like thunder. Kim's voice cracked as she whispered, "Are we seriously doing this?" as Todd places a crystal rod that he found in the ruins in his backpack for safekeeping. Todd shot her a grin, though there was a nervous edge to it. "Yep, worst case scenario, we get flattened. Best case, we make some new friends." John gave a small sigh. "You and your bright ideas, Todd." The crew stepped out of the cave, with the sunlight hitting them like a spotlight. To their astonishment, the giants froze. One by one, they bowed as their eyes widened with awe as they saw the crew emerge with their trinket in tow. "They think we're gods," Kim whispered, with her voice barely audible over the howling wind. As if on cue, the giant they had recognized earlier from their previous encounter rose to his feet, towering over the rest of the kneeling crowd. His deep-set eyes locked onto Todd, with recognition in his gaze. Slowly, he walked toward them, each step shaking the ground, until he stood directly before the crew. Todd held his breath as the giant lowered himself to one knee, bowing his head in reverence. His massive hand reached out, and with surprising gentleness, he touched the crystal trinket Todd had made. "Tony, help me," Todd called as he tossed the trinket over the giant's wrist. Tony grabbed the other end of the rope, fastening it securely. The giant, with a glint of admiration in his eyes, lifted his head to meet theirs, eye to eye, before proudly raising his arm to the crowd behind him. The giant grunted softly, making a series of gestures with his hands to the crowd. The translator beeped. Unrecognizable language. "Is he communicating?" Kim asked, wide-eyed. Tony nodded slowly. "I think so. He's signaling to the others." The giant faced his brethren, raising his hands and making a series of grunts and gestures. The other giants responded in kind, their deep voices rumbling in a way that seemed almost melodic. Whatever language they were speaking, it seemed broken up and come in spurts, so broken up that even the translator device couldn't make sense of it. But the meaning was clear. We were not a threat. The giants began to rise one by one, standing tall and mighty, but no longer chanting. They looked upon the crew not as intruders, but as something else, something sacred. Kim taking a step back to take in the full view of the giant before her. "I can't believe this is actually working." Todd nodded slowly. "Let's just hope it keeps working." The giant who had recognized them stood again, towering over the crew, but radiating a sense of calm. He gestured for them to follow, with his massive hand guiding them with a quiet authority. Todd exchanged a glance with John and Tony. "Well, looks like we've got an invitation." John let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Yeah, let's just hope it's not to dinner." They followed the giant deeper into the rows of his kind, now surrounded on all sides by beings who, just moments ago, they feared might turn on them. With the sun glinting off the crystal fragments on the trinket, the crew had become something more in the eyes of the giants, something supernatural. And for the first time in a long time, since they'd landed on this island, it felt like they might actually survive. As the giant stood towering over them, the crew exchanged uncertain glances. For a moment, they weren't sure what would happen next, but then the most unexpected thing occurred. One of the giants stepped forward, holding out an enormous basket brimming with food. This giant was unlike the others, with a form that, while undeniably powerful and brimming with rippling muscles, carried a certain femininity beneath its imposing stature. The broad shoulders and sinewy arms were reminiscent of its male counterparts, yet there was a grace in its movements, a fluidity that set it apart. Its features, though rugged, held a softness around the edges, and its eyes, large and expressive, shone with a quiet intelligence. The lines of its body, though muscular, curved with an elegance that seemed almost at odds with the brute strength it possessed. Clearly, this was the female of the species. Todd blinked in disbelief as the giant gently placed the basket in front of them, its size dwarfing anything they had ever seen. Inside were massive fruits and vegetables, enough to feed them for days. The giant gestured toward the children behind the crew, as if urging the children to take the food. "They're offering it to the kids," Kim whispered as her eyes widened. One of the younger children, no older than 8, stepped forward hesitantly and picked up a fruit nearly the size of her head. The giant smiled and nodded as if to encourage her. The girl took a bite, with her face lighting up in delight. "Well, looks like we're not on the menu," Kim joked, with her tone lightening for the first time in a while. Todd, however, was already thinking ahead. He crouched down and began drawing in the sand with a stick. "We need shelter," he muttered to himself. With quick, deft strokes, he sketched the outline of a small house, a simple structure, nothing fancy, but enough to keep the children safe. Once done, he stood up and pointed at the picture, then gestured toward the children. The giants looked down at the crude drawing, clearly confused. They grunted to each other, exchanging looks, and for a moment Todd feared they hadn't understood at all. But then, with a grunt of recognition, the same giant who had given them food nodded and pointed at the picture. Todd waved his arms enthusiastically. "Yes, a house. We need houses for the children." He pointed at the children again, then back at the drawing. The giant turned and barked something to the others, and in an instant they were in motion. With astonishing speed, the giants began picking up large boulders from the ground, carrying them effortlessly in their massive hands. They worked together, shaping the rocks with crude tools that looked similar to a hammer and chisel, fashioning a small cottage right before the crew's eyes. Within minutes, what had started as a sketch in the sand was now a fully formed stone structure, reminiscent of something out of an ancient world. Kim couldn't hold back her laughter as she examined the house. "It looks like the Flintstones' place," she said, giggling. The absurdity of the situation, a group of giants building stone houses like prehistoric architects in a cartoon, was too much for her funny bone to take. Todd grinned, impressed by the giants' handiwork. "If we could get them to build 1,000 or so more, we might just have the mythical city of bedrock." Elbowing Kim as he passed by her to take a closer look, the giants, oblivious to the joke, stood proudly beside their creation, as if awaiting approval. The children, hesitant at first, slowly began moving toward the makeshift cottage, with their eyes wide with wonder as they realized it was meant for them. "We're going to need a lot more of these," John said, scanning the ocean of children behind them. Todd nodded and quickly gestured to the giants again, pointing at the house and then to the vast number of children. With more hand gestures and a bit of miming, the giants seemed to understand, and soon they were at it again, gathering more stones, building more shelters, and creating a small village in what felt like no time at all. Kim stood back, marveling at the efficiency and strength of the giants. "I can't believe this is happening." she said quietly. "They're actually helping." John gave a low chuckle. "In the movies, giants always stomped on the houses. They did not build them. What a novel concept." But just as the mood began to lighten, the ground trembled beneath their feet. At first it was a faint rumble, but it quickly grew stronger, sending a wave of unease through the group. Todd's face turned pale as he looked up at the mountain. "Oh no." Kim turned to him. "What is it?" Todd's voice scratched as the realization hit him. "The purge. The volcano. We need to get out of here." John frowned. "What are you talking about?" Todd's eyes darted between the volcano and the crew. "Hope uses the volcano to cull the giants, remember? It's part of their belief system. Every so often the volcano erupts, sending a deadly gas cloud to thin their numbers. It's a control tactic to keep them in line, so if that volcano goes off, we're all in the blast zone." Kim's heart sank. "My God." Tony, under pressure, muttered, "I don't know about you, but I'd prefer not to be a sacrifice to anyone's gods if that is okay with the rest of you." John didn't laugh this time. He turned to Todd with his expression deadly serious. "How long do we have, would you say?" Todd shook his head. "I don't know, but we can't stay here. We have to move, and I mean now." The crew quickly gathered the children, shouting orders and directing the giants to help. The once calm and peaceful scene had now turned into a frantic scramble for survival as the ground rumbled beneath them with increasing ferocity. The sky above grew darker, with ash beginning to fall like snow, coating everything in a fine gray powder. "We need to get these kids and the giants out of here fast," Todd shouted, his voice barely audible over the growing roar of the volcano. "We do not want to be here when that thing blows." The giants, as if sensing the danger, began herding the children toward the far end of the valley, their long strides covering ground quickly. But time was running out, and with every step, the volcano's ominous presence loomed larger, its bellowing cries a constant reminder that they were on borrowed time. Todd glanced over his shoulder at the massive mountain. "This isn't just about saving the crew anymore," he muttered under his breath. "We're all in this together now." The crew, the children, and the giants hurried forward, with their fate tied to the mercy of the trembling earth beneath them. The ground trembled with growing intensity as they scrambled up the narrow path toward the cliffs. Todd led the way. A thick ash cloud was starting to billow from the volcano, growing denser by the second, its dark mass creeping toward them. "We need to keep moving," Todd shouted. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. The rumbling underfoot felt like the earth itself was coming alive, threatening to tear the ground apart. Kim, keeping pace behind him, said playfully, "Hey, Dad, this wasn't in the vacation brochure." "Bob," grunted John, "if this is your idea of a vacation, I want a refund," with a small laugh bellowing within him. The group kept climbing as they pushed the children up the steep incline. Above them, the giants was lifting the kids and placing them safely on the next ledge. "Talk about a giant helping hand," Tony joked, but his smile quickly faded as he glanced over his shoulder. The ash cloud was thickening and they were running out of time. Todd, still in the lead, reached the top of the cliff first and stopped dead in his tracks. His breath caught in his throat as he stared down into the valley below. "Oh my God," he whispered. John, Kim, and the others scrambled to the top beside him, following Todd's gaze. From their vantage point, the valley stretched out beneath them like a vast funnel, the cliffs on either side sloping inward. The way the mountains surrounded the valley wasn't natural. It looked like a deliberate design, a giant bowl leading straight toward the cave entrance below. "This whole valley, it's built to funnel the gas cloud," Todd murmured. "The surrounding mountains, they contain it, channeling the gas right to the cave." Kim's eyes widened as she processed Todd's words. "It's like a death trap, a perfect storm, for any unknowing soul outside the cave entrance would be doomed." Tony looked out over the valley, shaking his head in disbelief. "All that rumbling and shaking, and it's just for show. No lava, no real explosion, just a whole lot of gas and ash." Kim couldn't resist. "I'd take a fake eruption over a real one any day." The giants behind them moved the last of the children up the cliff. One of the giants, the familiar figure they'd recognized earlier, knelt beside Todd, grunting softly as if to thank him. The other giants, now gathered at the top of the cliff, looked down at the valley with somber expressions. In unison, they began to moan rhythmically. with their deep voices reverberating through the air like a haunting melody. One by one, they dropped to their knees, bowing toward the crew with a sense of gratitude. It was a gesture that went beyond words, a reverence that spoke of recognition and thanks, as if they understood the crew had somehow saved them from a deadly fate. Their massive forms, kneeling in a silent tribute, conveyed a respect that was profound. The ash cloud continued to billow up from the volcano, swirling and cascading through the valley below, but up on the cliffs they were safe, for now. The giants had saved the children and themselves, and as they stood overlooking the valley, the full scale of what had just happened hit them. Kim let out a shaky breath, with her eyes still locked on the valley below, and we were almost caught in the middle of it. John turned to Todd. "We got lucky, and we're not out of the woods yet, I remind you." Todd nodded, his eyes still locked on the distant ash cloud. "True, but it does feel like we've got a fighting chance now." As they stood at the edge of the cliff, the valley below hidden under a sea of swirling ash, the crew couldn't help but feel a new sense of hope. The giants had saved them, but the looming question remained: what came next? This is not goodbye, nor the end. Until the story continues, my friends. B.N.Rocker.